If you've been an Xbox fan for the past 2 decades, this might be the worst generation in the history of Xbox for you. Thought Xbox One era was bad? It's like Phil and the gang said, hold my beer, and then proceeded to show you just how much they could alienate the core Xbox fan base. I don't use the word core lightly, by the way. We, the loyal Xbox audience, have been left behind. What we care about in their so-called ecosystem doesn't seem to matter to Phil and his Kumbaya squad. Along with, of course, the groupies of clapping seals. Same groupies, by the way, who were up in arms 5 years ago about Xbox lacking exclusives. Now all of a sudden exclusives don't matter. Why? What changed? Do games no longer sell hardware in the console space? Are we living in a reality where Super Mario and God of War are no longer relevant to their platforms? Of course not. This seems to be a Microsoft-specific problem, one that they created. They spent over a decade pivoting from Kinect to TV, which they recently killed, by the way, then to GamePass, which is clearly not delivering as they'd hoped. And now it's all about play anyway. What happened to just making great games and letting them speak for themselves? Which leads me to the question, when last did Xbox make a true classic? Besides their only consistent workhorse, which is the Forza franchise. And again, even if you look at that front, they're not safe either. There's a lot of rumors going around whether or not we will see another motorsport. All this leads me to believe that the biggest mistake that we made as a community was to cheer on those acquisitions. So when we look back at Xbox history, the sad truth is the fact that the last real Xbox was probably the Xbox 360. It was the last time that Microsoft actually tried to go after the core gamers. You know, the guys that spend the most on buying games, that are the majority who subscribe to the likes of Xbox Gold, now Xbox Game Pass, and of course the driving force behind this so-called ecosystem, inverted commas. And guess what? It was still the most successful Xbox in history. It was perhaps the only time someone actually challenged Sony and almost beat them at their own game. Xbox had that. They almost did that. But back then, I'd like to think that they were following, if I look at, like, for instance, someone that I know talks about this a lot, which is David Jaffe. I think they were following his advice that he has given over the last couple of years, I don't know how many times, which is to get the right team who know how to run a gaming-focused business. Not a software business, a gaming-focused business. And they had that back in the day. You had the likes of Mark Whitten, Shane Kim, Jay Allard, Robbie Bark, and of course, Phil Spencer himself. A literal dream team in gaming. And of course, this was all led by the legendary former Sega of America President Peter Moore. And again, to everyone that was paying attention, us as fans, the news media, the entire gaming community, the focus was clear. Make Xbox the default place where most gamers want to play their games. And again, even if you look at their strategy, they stuck to that. They launched early, had a strong lineup, and Phil at that time, who was managing publishing, was on top of his game and ensured that each Xbox, even if you go back to the first Xbox, each Xbox launched with an impeccable lineup. Xbox 360 was no exception. It came out of nowhere and it had all these awesome games that you could go and play day one. You could experience next generation right now. You didn't have to wait for the PS3. But let's be clear, that was Phil running publishing. He was brilliant at that. He was excellent at that. In fact, I think that's some of the best work he's done at Microsoft. That's before he started running the entire Xbox business. And then, of course, if we look at how that business is run now, and if you look at, like, for instance, who's responsible for publishing, what they call Xbox Studios now was the equivalent of Microsoft Publishing or Microsoft Games back then. So that would be Matt Booty and his track record. You know, like, and the one thing that people underestimate about Matt Booty is the fact that Matt Booty is responsible for bringing on the likes of Minecraft, which was a huge win back in the Xbox One era. So he contributed a lot to Xbox's bottom line. He's he's made a lot of decisions that have made a lot of Xbox executives very, very well, Microsoft executives very wealthy. However, all those decisions, in my opinion as an Xbox fan, had been at the expense of the Xbox community and, of course, the core audience that Xbox, or that adopted Xbox as their core gaming brand. So yes, indeed, the game has changed and continues to change. And what I mean by that is I mean the gaming industry. And it also continues to evolve in very exciting ways. I mean, for me personally, platforms like Steam have become my default, gaming platforms. It offers versatility, ease of use, and access, making your library seamless and an extension of, whatever your gaming identity is. Sony continues to double down on its platform exclusives, which is great for their fan base, meaning that they're still giving their players a reason to be on their platform. And even though their first party has been more than disappointing this generation, and I believe that's thanks to a lack of competition, they still went out of their way to court second and third party titles like Stellar Blade, Silent Hill, Black Myth, Wukong to come out exclusively, even if it's for a timed period on their platform, driving interest in their ecosystem. Nintendo, they're still thriving. I mean, the recent launch of the Switch 2 has proven to be a runaway success. And they continue to double down on their hybrid console business model. And they are doing amazing business, especially in the portable space. However, again, they suffer from the same problem that Sony suffers from currently, which is they have no competition within that space. They remain unchallenged. As a result, their practices continue to be even more aggressive against consumers, and even in terms of monetization. A good example of that is their recent $80 price hike of their recent games. Not because they did mention the fact that game development costs have gone up, but they also gave a very bland explanation about the fact that, well, you know what, if it looks good, if it's Mario Kart, it's worth the price. You can see that the quality basically determines the price, which again is a very silly notion, because how do we measure that quality? That's a very subjective notion. So here we are. We're in a situation where literally we're in gaming no man's land, where Sony is literally on their own in the console space, Nintendo is dominating the handheld space, and Xbox has no space. Right now, we do not know where Xbox is going. They've hinted and said a lot of things. There's been a lot of talk of OEMs and them sort of taking a hybrid console/PC approach for their next generation. We do not know. In terms of their consoles, currently their consoles are outpriced in the sense that the Xbox Series X and the Series S have seen an uptick in price. We have not had a mid-gen refresh from Xbox, and of course GamePass continues to do well, and it's the only thing that seems to be doing well on that front. And as a hardcore gamer, I really, really find it difficult to sort of understand what Xbox's vision is and where I fit in within that ecosystem. But it doesn't really matter. The nice thing about Xbox is that they've given us enough options for you to actually explore outside their ecosystem, which I think is a great thing. If you're an Xbox gamer, like me, you have an Xbox Series X, you also have the app on your PC, and you can game across platforms, which is great. There's a lot of advantage there. But in terms of, am I ever going to support or buy any more Xbox hardware going forward into the future? Highly doubtful. I think my journey with Microsoft has literally come to an end. But I do look forward to seeing what they do offer next, because they're the only ones sitting in a space where we do not know where they're going.